Hey everybody, welcome to the all brand new live Atheist Experience television show out of Austin, Texas. Welcome. How you doing? I'm Matt Dillahunty. This is Tracie Harris. We are here today. It's a live call-in show. You'll be able to call in just as soon as I put the telephone numbers up on the screen. We like to talk to people about what they believe and why, and also about what we do or don't believe and why. Boy, the announcements just got shortened a whole lot today. After we're done with the show, we'll be at El Arroyo. They'll have the address up for you on the screen. But I want to get started by turning it over to Tracie right off the bat, because you had something you wanted to address really quickly before we get the calls.
Yeah, it is really quick too. And it's like, on the one hand, it's something that I was saying is it's so common that it almost seems like you shouldn't have to talk about it, and yet it gives people such a hard time that I just wanted to go over a couple things real briefly. And that is, I want to talk a little bit about the argument from ignorance. And I know everybody in the audience is like, oh, you know, we know what this is. I know what it is, you know what it is, and yet we still get letters from atheists confused about things, and it's, hey, this is the argument from ignorance. Why don't you recognize this? And so I have come to understand that it's very difficult sometimes for people to recognize it. And one of the things is, I did for a while started getting into debunkings. Like we did a show, I think, on debunking the miracle claims, a couple of miracle claims, and I did some debunkings at the blog. And I just want to say that, you know, I really didn't want and don't ever want debunking to be like my thing. And part of that is because when you're doing a debunking, it's like you've thrown up your hands and just given up and said, okay, I will accept as a hypothetical that the argument from ignorance is valid. It's not an error in reason. Because the only way you could get to requiring a debunking is for someone to be sold into the argument from ignorance as a valid thing. So when someone says, I had this experience and I saw this ghost, and then they tell you the story, or I had this experience, I saw an angel, and they tell you the story, or I had this experience and I saw, you know, whatever, and they give you what they saw, you know, like label it like the ghost thing, and say, this was my experience and I saw this and it was a ghost. And you'll say, well, how do you know that this was a ghost? Well, what else could it have been? Okay, now you're asking me to offer an alternate explanation before you will let go of your assumption. You haven't demonstrated that it's a ghost. You haven't demonstrated that how you know ghosts exist. You haven't demonstrated that what you saw, you know, what is a ghost, and how do you know that what you saw was a ghost? And you don't know they exist. You don't know what they do. You don't know what this was. And you're jumping to a conclusion without really having done anything except assume that you saw a ghost. And then you're basically saying, I'm just sticking with my completely ignorant assumption until you can show me that it was something else. Well, that's invalid reasoning. And there are some people who will let go of it when you point it out and you say that you're using the argument from ignorance and this is what you're doing. And sometimes people will back down and they'll say, you know what, you're right, I don't know what I saw. I know that it was like I experienced XYZ, and yeah, I did jump to the conclusion that it was a ghost because that's kind of like what people describe, but honestly, I don't know what it was, and I may never know what it was, and you're right, that's just kind of how I need to classify that as an unknown. Okay, well, thank you for seeing reason. But sometimes people don't see reason, and you have to just keep going, keep going, keep going, and then ultimately it gets into, let me look this up, let me see what you're describing, and here's what probably happened to you based on what you're describing. And you offer an alternate explanation. 9 times out of 10, the person will be like, oh, wow, I'd never heard of that before, and yes, it probably was that. And then, only then, are they willing to let go of this assumption. And it's sad to me. Like, I think I posted on my page today when I posted the announcement for the show that, you know, watch it live or you'll make Jesus cry. And when you push me for a debunking and you won't let go of the argument from ignorance, you make my heart sad. So I'm just letting you know that you make Tracie cry when you don't understand the argument from ignorance and you insist on a debunking to make you let go of an unreasonable assumption. The other time that I saw it recently, which is another thing that one person brought it up, but please understand that this is not about this one person. I understand this is a common problem for people, and that's why I'm discussing it, but I really thought it was just one person. I wouldn't even bring it up. But I had made a comment on, I think it was last time I was on, that one of the callers called in and he was talking about miracles in the Bible and prophecies in the Bible, and what about where the universe come from, the life come from? And I said, it doesn't matter if all of those miracle claims were true. If Jesus really turned water into wine, if Jesus really came back from the dead, you have not demonstrated a God. You're just using the argument from ignorance. You're saying that this person came back from the dead and I assume it was a God because I don't know how to explain it, right? I need that debunking, or else I'm just going with the assumption it's a God. It doesn't matter that I don't know what a God is, and I've never seen one, and we've never objectively verified it exists, and we've never been able to examine one. We don't know if gods are the types of things that would even care about bringing people back from the dead if they did exist. I mean, we have no idea what a God is. We can't examine it. We can't verify any claims about God. If somebody comes back from the dead and they say, God brought me back from the dead, well, I mean, I'm amazed you came back from the dead, but I don't know how you did it. I don't know what happened. I don't know what brought you back from the dead. So when you're saying, I understand you're saying God did it. I don't know if you're honest. I don't know if you're sane. I don't know, what has convinced you that it was a God that did it, but I don't know, and you haven't verified it, and you haven't demonstrated it, and you don't have anything to explain to me how it is you came to the conclusion that it was a God that did it. I don't know what gods are. I don't know what they do. And it's the same with, how'd you turn water into wine? I have no idea how somebody would do that. If that really occurred, and we, had a study where we had all kinds of controls, and we saw somebody just, turn to wine, and there it goes. I don't know how they did it. And if they said God is what gave them power to do it, we still don't know how they did it. We know they're claiming God said it, but gave them that power, but we wouldn't know. So my point when I made the comment was, it doesn't matter what you're showing me as far as effects. You've got to demonstrate your cause God, or else you're just saying that God is the cause, and you're not really demonstrating how you come to that conclusion. And it's the same with the intelligent design argument. It's the same idea. It's like, there's this stuff, and I can't explain it. It's so crazy that it just has to be a God. It's like, well, you haven't demonstrated it. So it's like this argument from ignorance. And what they were asking me was, in their mind, it seemed unfair. It was like, well, if somebody can present you with miracles, if someone were able to present you, assuming, like hypothetically, with real prophecies, with real miracles, with real, showing you that there were these true miracles, that there were these true prophecies, wouldn't that be, at what point would that be a demonstration of a God? And I said, at no point is that a demonstration of a God, because at no point does an argument from ignorance become evidence. It doesn't matter if you have 2 arguments from ignorance or 3 arguments from ignorance, it never becomes evidence. And finally, what I said that I think helped them understand it, and I posted this elsewhere, just my response to it, and other people said, this is really helpful and you should share this, so I'm sharing it. I basically said, it's like trying to use 0 to get to 1. It doesn't matter how many zeros you add together, it never equals 1. You can't get to evidence from a list of arguments from ignorance. And no matter how many things you attribute to God, if you can't demonstrate that it is cause God, and you're just making the claim that the cause is God, and all you're showing are effects, but no, you're not showing how you validated that cause, you are making an assumption with no information, just out of ignorance. So no matter how much of that you pile on, you could pile on arguments from ignorance for the next 3 years at the rate of like 1 per minute, and you still don't ever come to an ounce of evidence.
Yeah, you're not a step closer.
Yeah.
In simplest terms, argument from ignorance just means X is true because X has not been proved false. And that is the basis of the fallacy for argument from ignorance. There's Dawkins identified and labeled a slightly different version, which I think is the one we hear more often. He calls it the argument from personal incredulity, because X is true because I can't think of a better explanation, which is a failure of imagination.
Yeah.
In both of those, I mean, all that's really happening is a shifting of the burden of proof. And as Tracie's pointing out, we may be able to get to identify that a phenomenon has occurred, but we cannot get to the cause of that phenomenon until we have some demonstrable possible cause that we can evaluate. And we never get there with the God things. The other thing is that people have a general discomfort with not knowing.
Some people do.
And yeah, well, I think by and large this affects all of us in different areas. But rather than having no answer, they'll seem to latch on to any answer or the first answer. And in some cases, people will send us an email and say, look at this and this and this and this and this and this and this. There's just no way that couldn't be caused by God. I had an interaction over this past week with a Muslim talking about how the Quran has all this scientific information in it. It doesn't. But he's like, well, this is 1,400 years ago, and, how did they know this and this and this and this and this? And I'm saying, first of all, I don't see any demonstration that they actually knew anything. You're taking passages and you're interpreting them when you already have the knowledge. But even if you were correct that they knew all this information, you can't get from them knowing it to how they knew it. Maybe God told them. Maybe some advanced aliens told them. Maybe they guessed and got right. Maybe it's a coincidence. Or maybe, what I think is most likely, they didn't know a damn thing, and you're reading into the text what you want. You want this to be true, you want this to be meaningful and powerful, and so you're like, hey, this thing here says the earth is round, and guess what? We found out it's round. Well, in the case of the Quran, I got to kind of laugh that one off, since the Greeks knew the shape of the earth about, 700-800 years before the Quran was written. But argument from ignorance and the argument from personal incredulity, both of them are just shifting the burden of proof, and we get nowhere, and we hear them all the time.
Yeah, don't let somebody get away with assuming cause.
Yeah. Now, it is okay to, as Tracie was talking about with the debunking, to go ahead and assume for the sake of argument a point that they're making in order to show that it's absurd. There's an argument reducto ad absurdum. Basically, you start with this premise and you show that it leads to something that's patently false, and so you can reject the premise. And that's okay to do. That's encouraged to do. You want to get to some calls?
Sure.
All right. We've got Josh in LA. How are you?
Oh man, I'm good. I'm on, right? That's cool.
You're on. Thanks for waiting.
Thanks for having me. I hope I don't make Tracie cry, because I like Tracie when she's not crying. But just happy Mother's Day out there too. But I guess I just want to call it. I hope I'm not bringing up a personal experience in a way that takes away from my argument, but I wanted to know basically how you guys felt about the kind of like a mystical experience interpretation of, or experience of God. I know you guys probably don't believe in mysticism and revealing spirituality and all that, but I guess what I'm trying to say is in ancient Hindu scriptures, like the Upanishads, they talk about how sages saw within themselves, in the depths of meditation, the universal form of the Creator. And I'm wondering, and I guess my point in all that is I actually have gone to talk to a couple yogis, and most of them can be full of crap, but a couple of them actually can relate to this experience of seeing within themselves, in the depths of meditation, some sort of universal form that basically that's the point of discussion in the Upanishads. I was just wondering how you guys feel about that. And then also I have maybe one more comment.
You want to start, or you want me to start?
Well, I would start by asking for some definitions.
Yeah, like mystical. Is that the first one?
I have mystic and spiritual.
I have spiritual, right?
And I have universal form of the Creator. I also would do that.
Why am I here? Go ahead.
Yeah, so first of all, please tell me what mystic means.
Okay. I guess just like a personal experience.
So if I ate cheesecake, is that mystical? That's a personal experience. If I ate a piece of cheesecake, you think that's mystical?
I still can't hear you. I'm sorry, Tracie.
Is my microphone on? Can you hear now?
Yeah, okay, there you go.
Okay, I was asking, is any personal experience mystical? Like if I ate cheesecake, would that be mystical?
No, I mean, I guess, I should be more descriptive, like a personal experience with, like a personal yoga experience, I guess.
Okay, I've done yoga before, and it made me very relaxed, like you would feel after a massage, so is that mystical?
Mm-hmm.
That's mystical.
Okay, I guess, okay, here, let me give another example. So basically, I guess I would call myself a Hindu. And the goal in Hinduism, the goal of yoga, which means to link up or to yoke, is to link up like kind of like your brain, as if, think of your brain as a computer linking up with the world around it, and as kind of like a supercomputer. So we all can upload, I guess, or link up to that supercomputer through yoga, whatever that the program is. We're not sure because it's personal, but the goal of yoga is to get to a point where you link up and download, let's say, a revelation, a personal mystical revelation. So I guess what...
Wait, you're using mystical in your definition, which doesn't help. I'm getting really lost here. Can you just define the word mystical?
I guess maybe not mystical, mysticism. it would, I guess, it would be like the science of the soul.
Can you define soul for me?
Yeah.
What is a soul?
Science of, or the soul being maybe something that is more abstract, like love. I guess the idea of love that is a definition and can be related to chemical things going on in the brain, but also something that transcends the chemical as well.
What transcends the chemicals?
I mean, I guess like if you ever meet someone in a bar and you just feel like good chemistry with them, that might transcend.
So you
something else.
are you talking about like an attraction, like you're physically attracted to a stranger in a bar?
That, and also maybe there's coincidence or something that brings you and a stranger together that could transcend maybe your everyday experience. If you live, like, let's say, a mundane life and you don't really have like a whole lot of romantic engagements or interactions, and then one day, just out of the blue, you meet someone who you might think that you were meant to meet.
So, okay, so if I understand you, then mystical or mysticism is physical attraction plus a coincidence.
No, I would call it more like the emotional chemical response taking place in the body, plus all the emotions and consequences that transcend those physical emotional responses. I know that's kind of
Jack, my head's going to explode if we keep using any more kind of nonsense
Okay.
words
Well,
and phrases.
okay, yeah,
Here's
I
the
agree with
thing.
that. I agree with that.
Here's
Go
the
for it.
thing. Wow. Okay, you're talking about real things, like meeting somebody or chemistry in the brain, and then you keep wanting to add something to it, something special. And part of that something special that you wanted to add to it, you label coincidence, which I don't think is anything significant. Coincidences happen. If you're trying to make something significant out of coincidences, you need to actually demonstrate that this is true. You talked about yogis saying most of them are full of crap, but others aren't. I'd like to know how you tell the difference between the ones that are full of crap and the ones that aren't. And this idea of seeing a universal form. Well, the fact that somebody can engage in some introspection and come up with an idea, or come to some awareness of an idea that somebody else has presented, doesn't tell me one bit whether that is true, that there is any universal form. It's like if you constructed something where people meditated on how we are all secretly unicorns, and if you just sit down and think about this and focus on your inner self, you'll find that we're all beautiful unicorns. Well, the fact that somebody might sit around and engage in this sort of introspective exercise and come to realize that deep down they're a unicorn doesn't mean they're a unicorn. So what I want to know is, this seems to me to be nothing more than a bunch of contemplatives sitting around coming up with neat ideas that sound deep, or as I think Daniel Dennett would probably call these deepities, and then sharing them with other people, and then they are in this desperate struggle to reach this same awareness because it makes them feel like they've accomplished something when they haven't accomplished anything that we can tell.
Well, I had kind of an interesting thought, though, when you were talking about the universal form of the Creator. It's like, let's say that you draw a picture and there's like an image that's in an envelope on the table, and that is, let's call it the form of whatever the image. And you come up with, you think really hard and you come up with this image and you draw the image and you tell me this is the form of the image that's in the envelope, right? And let's say I don't have access to what's in the envelope. How do I know that's correct?
Yeah, I guess you don't.
So if somebody tells me that they experienced or saw or envisioned or idealized or somehow experienced the universal form of the Creator, if I don't have that available to compare to what they're telling me, then how do I know that what they're describing is what they're saying it is?
Okay, that's a great point. Can I be more specific? So I guess the Hindu religion is very specific. They have in what this image is, and that, I guess that's where I'm going with my argument, is what is described throughout the Hindu scriptures seems to be uniform in description, and the exhaustiveness of those descriptions and the uniformity of those descriptions, in my opinion, kind of shows that there might be at least some sort of uniformity to what these contemplatives are experiencing. And let me give you an example. Is they all describe this entity, the universal form of the Creator, as having a physical manifestation in the real world that we can contemplate, and that physical manifestation in the real world is called the sun that we experience every day. And so with that, looking at the sun, we can describe the traits of an entity, let's say, behind the sun's physical manifestation, maybe more of a spiritual entity that informs that sun. This is just basically what I'm saying, is this is what the Hindu scriptures are saying. I'm not saying this is true or not, but how they all have a link and uniform description of this Creator is that they describe that He is sun, which means He is not large, not small. He is medium shaped, just like our sun. He's average size, but He's luminous, like the sun. They can describe the rays that they experience coming off of the sun as just like sunlight, as informing all spaces and seeping into all spaces, but also being removed from everyone's experience enough that we don't have to every day go and bow down to the sun, but we can still live in that sun's light. So I guess that would be, Tracie, in response to you, the image that even if you couldn't see it, at least that's a hint as to what it could be.
Except that it's the people that are describing the universal form of the Creator who are telling me this. It's the person who drew the picture telling me this is what you'll find in the envelope.
Or worse yet, to kind of, first of all, consistency of assertions is not confirmation of the truth of the assertion.
I actually wrote down UFO encounters.
Yeah, and so you imagine the envelope that Tracie's talking about. We've got, let's make it a box. Just for this, there's something in the box, or maybe there's nothing in the box. We don't know. But if somebody sits around and thinks that they can, mentally escape their body, astral projection, whatever, and go in and suss out what's in the box, and they come to this conclusion, and they tell other people, and then a bunch of other people come to the same conclusion that they've already been primed to come to, we're still no closer to finding out what's in the box. And it doesn't matter if 1 billion people come to the same conclusion about what's in the box. That doesn't mean that it's any more likely to be true.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, yeah,
this is exactly what Tracie was talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, totally. I completely agree. I'm not necessarily for or against either one. I'm just wondering, as a person who reads these Hindu scriptures, how an atheist would think of that.
One of the things that you mentioned, Josh, one of the things that you mentioned was that this is the science of the soul. And that makes me want to vomit. Because science is nothing like what you've described, and it's entirely based on demonstration and independent verification and confirmation and evidence and peer review and all the other stuff. And when you say science of the soul, we have good scientific reason to believe that nothing like the soul actually exists. So when somebody takes something which we get pretty good reason to think that this doesn't exist, and then props it up as a truth and then develops a science around it, you might as well be talking about the science of pixies. Calling something a science doesn't make it a science. That's like the oldest trick. It's like when you watch What the Bleep Do We Know, and they're getting, experts in quantum physics and stuff to come on and talk about things that everybody else doesn't understand, and then they twist them so that it seems like they're saying something important and true, when really they've said nothing that approaches demonstrable truth.
Yeah, I don't want to get all hung up on definitions, and I'm not even going to ask for your definition on this one, but the other word was, spiritual or spirit. That's another one where I ask people all the time, what do they mean by that? And I can never get a coherent answer, or I should say at least a consistent answer. And, the idea of like a spiritual sun behind the sun, or it's like, well, I understand the sun, but the sun behind the sun, I don't understand. And I'm not asking you to explain it. I'm just saying that, that word spiritual is the other loaded word that would have been on the list. But I don't want to spend too much time. But I think as far as what would we think of the concept, I'm hoping that we answered that question for you. Do you feel satisfied that you got an answer?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Totally. You guys are great. Thank you very much. Sorry if I confused you guys too much, but
No, thank you for your call. I appreciate it.
I'm more worried about you confusing yourself. That's the danger here.
Confused, but,
Okay.
I guess I would be confused at this point in my life, but I'm pretty young, so I got a little while to go to figure it out.
No, but that's kind of, thanks Josh, that's kind of the
you.
danger here, and that's kind of why we end up doing what we do, to ask people what they believe and why, is because if they're correct, I certainly want to know. I mean, if they've got good reason to believe something, I would like to believe it.
Sure.
But if they're not, I'd like to have them understand why we don't believe, so that maybe they can stop believing things without good reason.
Yeah.
Happens sometimes. We've got Wyatt in Salem. How you doing?
Hi, how are you? Thanks for having me on, Matt and Tracie.
Sure.
Hello.
I'll get straight to the point given the short show here, given I have a few things to go over here. I've been an atheist all my life and a vegetarian for the majority of my life. And I'm curious what your opinions are on eating animals, which you do, right?
I do, and I don't think it's relevant to atheism.
Well, about how people, usually religious, oftentimes use it as an excuse to about how...
Used what as an excuse?
Well, how God put animals on the earth to eat.
Sure.
Religion also
how,
promotes vegetarianism. I mean, religion is also the reason for most vegetarianism. I mean, as far as like when you go to continents where people eat meat on every continent, and generally the origins of not eating it have to do with spiritual beliefs about animals.
Yeah, religion isn't just one thing. It can support either of those positions. But yeah, you're right. There are people who would use, for example, the biblical passages about what you can and can't consume as a justification for eating meat. I don't see how that's remotely relevant, because the fact that the Bible says something and doesn't have a good reason for it doesn't mean it's wrong. It just doesn't mean it means it doesn't have a good reason.
Oh, okay. Well, I apologize, and then I thought that would be a little bit more under that category there.
No, I don't have. There's no tie between my atheism, well, and pretty much anything else actually.
Yeah.
My atheism is the result of skepticism applied to religious claims. Now, if we talk about my humanist positions and whether or not there's a tie there, there may be, there may not be. I have particular definitions and understandings about morality and ethics and where they apply and where they don't. And we've had the vegetarian/veganism discussion over and over on the show and in emails.
Oh, really? I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
I missed that then.
No. I'm not putting you down for that, Wyatt, because the fact of the matter is we'll discuss the same thing, I don't know, hundreds of times in the course of this show. It comes up a lot. I just don't want to get into it in great detail, because my big thing is that I don't see this as an ethical issue. And until somebody convinces me that it is an ethical issue, I don't find a problem with my consumption of meat. Now, if you want to talk about the meat industry and whether or not they're doing things that I object to, that's a completely different issue. And the one thing that I point out to vegetarian or vegan, ethical vegans in particular, is that they should go out to a farm someday and walk behind the combine as it harvests their vegetables and look at the carnage that it leaves in its wake before they go claiming that they're not doing any harm. But now we're kind of way off the beaten track.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks. I apologize for that.
That's all right. Thanks, Wyatt.
No
Thanks.
need to apologize.
All right. Thanks.
Sure.
Enjoy your salad.
And that wasn't sarcastic.
No, that was meant to be
fun.
just humorous. I'm
Yeah.
not. I have no problem at all. Eat whatever you want is my thing. This actually kind of reminds me a little bit of the conflict between.
So you support eating babies? You would eat people?
Oh no.
Okay, no, we're not going there.
No. We'll stay off there because we can. Yes. So this reminds me a little bit of the conflict that happens between like the firebrand atheist and the accommodationist, because the firebrand atheist, we're basically saying we need all approaches.
Sure.
And the accommodationists are saying, no, we don't need your approach. You firebrand folks are actually doing harm. And there's this divide here where they seem to think that there's something wrong that they haven't been able to assert is actually wrong. And I see a similarity in that between the carnivore versus the ethical vegan. But we're so far afield of where we started that I don't know what to do. Victor in London, how are you?
Hello, can you hear me?
We can.
Well, first I'd like to thank you all for doing this show.
Thank you.
I've been watching it for quite some time now, and it has helped me a lot with adapting to the idea of being an atheist. As I was raised in a Christian family, and was a Christian until I was about 14 years old. And since then, until I started watching the show about 6 months ago, I just consider myself an agnostic, whereas now I consider myself an agnostic atheist, not knowing before that those two were not mutually exclusive. Hello?
Yes.
Hello.
Congratulations.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're good.
And I would also very quickly like to say that I appreciate the fact that you're encouraging people to think critically, as that has helped me to be more skeptical, and I'm sure many others have also benefited from the effort you're all doing there. The question I have for you is, why do you think that there are so many irrational people in the world right now? Because I find it a bit weird that there can still be so much irrationality in the world these days, despite the fact that humans have evolved to have a brain which allows them to build computers and spacecraft and develop cures for diseases.
Sure. This one I think is actually pretty easy, and I talked about it a little bit. If the videos for the last couple debates that I did are up online, and I talked about it in the debate that we did in Frisco, Texas with JT and I, which is up on my Facebook page and at JT's blog as well.
Right.
Part of this is about compartmentalization, about protecting the beliefs that we hold, and religious systems have a very good mechanism for self-protection. But the big thing is that we tend to live our lives based on inference and induction. That today is pretty much the same as yesterday. We have built up, we use our reasoning and our experience in combination to build up the sort of our intuition, our visceral reactions, and we live primarily by inference and induction, which means that I'm comparing the situation I'm in to other situations and trying to come to what seems like or feels like the best answer. Because if I sat around and actually spent time reasoning through A and B and considering all the possibilities, which I can't do in many cases, that would be too much time. It would be too much investment.
Right.
And so the problem is that while inference and induction are really, really good at getting us through most things, what they do is they inflate our opinion of our own intellect and our own ability to reason to the point that when we intuitively come to a wrong conclusion, it has the same strength as the right conclusions until it's challenged. And if that wrong conclusion sits there and you base a lot of other things upon it, and it seems to work, like is what you get in many religions, this idea, oh, there's a God, and I'm going to pray and sing along with everybody, and I feel goosebumps and elation. And all of these things work together to create a safety net around that belief so that it's very hard to get into where the core belief that's wrong is. And this inflation of our estimation of our own intellect causes us to overemphasize how correct we are.
Right, and I wasn't talking only about religious people. I was talking about atheists as well, because some atheists can be irrational at times as well. That's why I was
absolutely.
asking the question.
Yeah, it applies to everything, not just religious beliefs. It applies everywhere. We are always capable of getting something wrong, but the fact that we get so many things right without even hardly trying, I mean, it's if you sat down and tried to categorize, count up in just a given day, how many decisions you made based on some sort of evidence or some sort of claim, you'd be floored. I mean, it's everything you do. You know, am I going to do this now? Am I going to do this now? There's not even always a decision-making process. It happens at a subconscious level, and you know, we are our brains, and we're kind of prisoners and victims of our brains on occasion.
That's true.
I would also add that it's like the capacity to see patterns is extremely useful in survival, not just for humans, but for everything. And so what happens is we tend, not just as humans, but other animals as well, to I guess, identify a pattern very quickly, even if it's not really a pattern. That might tie into like coincidences, for example. But there was an experiment where they took a pigeon and they gave it a treat when it did a certain thing. And I think it was like hitting a button or something like that. When the pigeon would do this, he would get a treat. And it took him just a few turns to realize that I hit this button, I get a treat. So they let him get the treats for a while, and then they stopped giving him treats when he did that. And it took him like some ridiculous number of hits before he finally gave up trying to get the treat. So to break that pattern was really hard. It was real easy to set the pattern. All he needed was a reward a couple times to say, ooh, I get this, I do this, I get a reward. But to get him to stop that took a long time. So people are, I think, very similar in that we see patterns quickly. But the problem is sometimes it only takes a couple of lucky hits to make us think that my lucky socks are what made my team win the game, so I'm going to wear my lucky socks every time my team plays. Right? Because the last 2 times I wore these socks, my team won, so I'm always wearing these socks when we play now.
And the other thing that we know is once somebody has vocally expressed a belief that they hold, a position that they have, they are less likely to change their mind, and they are going to be more protective of it. So once you start talking, go ahead.
Sorry, what I wanted to say is that despite the fact that humans indeed rely on this kind of patterns, in the same time, our intellect has evolved to the extent that I suppose it would have been able to manage to dominate this kind of reliance on patterns. That's why I thought that...
yeah, and yet there's lucky socks.
No. That's, yes, our intellect has evolved, but we don't want to get rid of that. Because by and large, it's incredibly useful, and we're most often correct about those things. We're really, really good at pattern spotting. We're really, really good at relying on this, and most of the time, it's a complete benefit. There are exceptions where this becomes a negative, and one of the other things is that as our intellect increases, we get better at protecting our treasured negatives from scrutiny. And so it's
kind of an irony, isn't it?
Yeah,
yes.
It is. It's a catch-22.
Does that help?
Well,
yeah.
So yeah, definitely. Well, thanks a lot, guys, and keep up the good work. I don't want to hold you any longer because I know you have a lot of callers there.
Thanks for calling.
Right. Thanks, Victor.
All right, thanks.
As a quick reminder, because there's like 20 minutes left in the show, we're going to head over to El Arroyo after the show. There's the address at the bottom of the screen. Do what you want. Stephen in Montreal, Quebec, how are you?
Hey, pretty good. How about you?
Not too bad.
I don't usually like getting that question asked, though.
You don't like getting what question asked?
I guess how are you?
When people ask you, how are you? I have a feeling everybody always lies or nobody really cares, but it's all right.
I said swamped and busy and...
Yeah, on some occasions, it's funny you bring that up, because on some occasions, just as like a little test to see whether this is the unthinking interactions that humans do or whether or not somebody's actually interested, sometimes I just pause for a second and think about how I actually am.
Well, me too. And you know what? When I pause, hesitation, people think, oh, he's not going very good.
Yeah, well, he's getting ready to bore me for 30 minutes with all the troubles in his life.
There you go.
But by and large, I am doing pretty well, and thank you for asking.
Great.
What do you got for us?
Okay, well, I just wanted to have your opinion on one thing. How somebody comes to believing in one thing or another. I believe, okay, first of all, I do believe in God. I also believe that most people who say that they believe in God have a fake belief and they don't really believe in God. They just think they do or they want to. You know where I'm getting to with this?
I think so.
Yeah.
Let me say that we're probably already in agreement on quite a few things.
Yeah.
And that is that belief isn't a simple choice.
Exactly.
Okay? And that there are people who honestly believe things, and that there are people who profess belief in things because there's a benefit to professing that belief. But by and large, my problem is that I don't, as the external observer, I don't have a way of digging into people's brains to tell whether this is true or not. But when you say that there are people who fake a belief but think they believe it, that's where I think we disagree. Because now there may be a difference between what the conscious mind, accepts. But if I think I believe something, then by definition I believe it. Now, whether or not I'm, we're not necessarily absolutely convinced of this, but I mean, we are still talking about my brain. I don't know. I don't know how you could believe something and not.
It's kind of like saying somebody isn't really happy; they just think they're happy. Well, if the person feels happy, then they're happy.
It.
Well, but I'm saying that that's the
sort of like that.
But there's no
I was
difference
just thinking
between
that when you believe in something, it's like it's like if your unconscious brain will decide for you with information that you've gathered. Oh, I believe in this because I have more information that's pointing into this direction.
Sure.
If you have no information at all, how can you can't, I don't think you can choose to believe this or that just because you want to believe this.
I wouldn't call it a choice, but I would say that there are people that can come to a belief with almost no information.
And the other,
for sure, yeah.
And the other thing that I'd say, I talked about this a couple of years ago. If you go to the ACA website, there's a lecture on belief that I did way back when. I think that it's possible. I think people always act in accordance with their beliefs, always. I don't think that the people are always aware. There's a collection of beliefs that I have, and they impact each other. And I can say, I believe that honesty is paramount. And I can profess that, and as long as I think that I actually believe that honesty is one of the most important things, then I'm sincere in that. But there may be situations in which honesty is not the best thing. And so in that situation, I might not act honestly, or I might encourage someone else not to act honestly. But that doesn't change what I actually believe. I mean, we're talking about situational differences. And so people weight their beliefs. This is more important than this. And that weighting can change as the situation changes. I realize that's kind of about actionable beliefs, but that's really all I can say is that I think people act in accordance with their beliefs. And so when you find somebody who's acting in a way that isn't in accordance with the professed belief, you still don't know if they were lying about their belief or if you've encountered a situation where that belief is
came in conflict with another belief. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not too sure about the lying about the belief, if they're lying or not, but just that they actually do believe or not, and if it's based on anything that's real. But like if we just take the subject of what the show's about, believing in God or not believing in God, I think a lot of people just sort of make it up without even unconsciously make it up just to feel good.
Well,
that's kind of weird. Eh?
I think there are people who sincerely believe, and I think there are people who sincerely don't believe.
Yeah, that's
and then in each of those categories, or there are people who profess belief and don't and profess disbelief. And in each of those categories, you may find, like for example, in the belief category, you may find some people who sincerely believe, some people who believe and are convinced that they believe, but ultimately don't in the situations where this is in conflict and weighted. And then there are people who are flat out lying about what they believe because there's some benefit to professing a belief.
Yeah, that's right. That was sort of my first thing that I wanted to talk about. Do I still have time to get into something else?
Sure.
Okay. I want to talk about evolution a little bit.
Okay.
Okay, because when I was young, I always believed in God, but never really knew why. I guess I just grew up like that. I did start studying evolution a few years ago, and that's what really made me believe in God. Now, I wanted to give you some examples of... okay, wait, I have some notes here that I took before calling. Yeah. I'll give you an example of a car that has no...
Hey, when you say you studied evolution and it led to and it strengthened your belief in God, what do you mean by studied evolution? Because this is a new one.
Okay. Yeah, I haven't. Okay, studied maybe is a big word. I researched. I did some personal research on evolution with information from different sources.
And you came out believing in God more strongly.
Yeah. Exactly.
Okay. Why?
Well, okay, I'll give you this example of, it's an example I like to use a lot because it's very simple. But if I take, for example, a car, and I take off the wheels, I take off the engine, take off the steering wheel, obviously the car's not going to run.
Sure.
Well, that's a few reasons why the car won't run, but if I just take off the wheels, it won't run. I don't have to take off anything else. So this is where I'm going at with this.
Sure. I think what you're talking about is this idea called irreducible complexity.
No, not at all. Not at all. It's just an example of, there are some examples, some things that I saw about evolution that don't work. And there are many things that, in my opinion, don't work. But I only need one of these things to not believe in evolution.
Wait, let me ask real quick. I'll let you get to this, Stephen. Do you know what the idea of irreducible complexity is?
Yeah, I do.
Because what you described sounds virtually identical.
I know. That's a coincidence. I didn't want to have it refer to that.
Okay, I'll let you continue then.
I just wanted to show the example that I can have just one reason to...
Oh, he's comparing the car to his reasons, not to evolution.
Okay.
Okay. I wanted to get your opinion on this because it's not an example that I hear very often. Actually, I don't think I've ever heard this example when people talk about evolution. Okay, for example, if we take like a fish and we give it 1 million years to transform into a lizard, for example. All right?
Okay.
You're following me?
I understand what you're saying so far.
Okay. If we go halfway through this change, let's say at 500,000 years, what would we find there? I believe that we'd find a creature with semi-legs or parts, body parts that aren't really used for anything just yet. And if we look at this creature, we probably couldn't tell if these parts are growing or if they're being erased.
Sure. What you're talking about is a transitional form between a fish and a lizard.
Sort of. Oftentimes when I hear evolutionists talking about transitional forms, they always point out or show photos of animals that are complete.
No, you know why? Because every living thing is a transitional form.
Well, that's what I disagree with, because I don't have any parts on me that are not being used right now.
What about like, you know, there's some parts like your, you're shouting out appendix. What about your nipples? Are you a male?
Actually, you know what? The nipple thing, it's apparently it's because the nipples are developed before the sex of the baby is developed.
But why would the males have them? Why would the males develop them?
Well, because when the nipples develop, we're not at the stage of are we a male or a female just yet. But what I wanted to get into...
It's a part you're not using.
Sorry?
It's a part you don't use that's on your body.
That's right.
To be fair, though, it's not a part that's useless within a species.
What I mean about a part that we're not using is not like an earlobe or an appendix, but something that's big and obvious.
Well, I'm sorry, but you don't get to redefine everything in order to get rid of what you don't like. The fact of the matter is, every living thing that has ever lived is a transitional form. We are all the offspring of our ancestors, and change happens. We can document and chronicle this change. The common ancestry of humans and the other great apes is something that's just confirmed. I mean, it's this idea people have a...
What would make you think that if there was a transitional form between a lizard and let's say this is a fish that's devolving towards something like a lizard, if you had the transitional form halfway through, what makes you think that the parts would be useless? They would just be used in a different way than they would ultimately be used by the lizard, and that they...
It's just that the image that I'm getting in my head when I think about this transition is that I just imagine a leg that's growing into a full leg.
Okay, first of all, this image that you've got is kind of flawed, because the one thing that evolution is looking for isn't just positive traits that benefit, but it also selects against negative traits. So as long as something's not sufficiently negative, it can persist. and then be adapted to another use. So this idea, you've got a fish with no legs and you've got a lizard with legs, and you're seeing a half a leg. Well, it's not half a leg. It's a leg. It's just a smaller leg, and it just may not function as well as the lizard's leg. But as long as it either provides some positive benefit to that fish or doesn't provide a sufficient negative benefit to be selected against, it persists. It's not a useless...
Well, we have fish that can walk, that have legs, they can go on land. I mean, they propel, and it's like they have little flipper legs. And
Yeah, that's right.
And those, they're not a leg, but they're a modified flipper thing, and the fish uses it, and it helps the fish. It doesn't need a leg, so you're looking
I
at
agree
it.
with that. But it's still an animal that's complete, and it doesn't have
Well,
any...
of course, it's not going to be an incomplete animal. I mean, what is he looking for, half an animal?
Every animal is
I'm looking for
identical.
half a leg or a leg.
It
that's
is.
maybe
It's a
not
modified
yet,
fin.
or
I mean, it's
a
a
leg
pa-
that's not complete.
It's
That's
not a
complete
fin,
for
it's not a leg. It's part way through. You're looking for something that goes up to the knee? I mean, really?
No, not that goes up to the knee, because it doesn't actually develop like that. It would
develop like a fin developing into a leg eventually from something like a modified fin that the fish can use like a leg, which is what you see with something, I think it's a lungfish. I might be wrong about the species, but there's a fish that does this, that has these sort of rudimentary, sort of modified flipper leg things.
This reminds me of the half an eye argument, which is absolutely absurd. You know, a lot of anti-evolutionists have said, you know, what use is half an eye? As if the eye, our eye is some pinnacle, and way back when there was something without an eye and it evolved half an eye. And that's not the way evolution works. And by the way, in the sense that evolution does work, half an eye turns out to be a lot more useful than no eye, which is why we have eyes. You can see, you can go online and find out, I know there's old Richard Dawkins videos of this, and there's some newer ones too, where you start with just light-sensitive cells on the skin, which provide a benefit, and then in some cases they cup, which provides more benefit because now you have directional light, and in some cases they get down to a pinpoint where that can just be a muscle, like a mollusk eye. We find examples of all the different various forms of eyes in this process throughout both the fossil record and in the living world now. So it's not.
Yeah, I've seen some of that stuff. Yeah.
Sure.
And I would just point out too that evolution, as far as like changing the traits of a breeding population, is only ever been observed and achieved through evolution up until the point we did genetic modification in a lab. I mean, there's never been any other observed mechanism for changing the traits of a breeding population other than evolution. I mean, I don't know where you would have seen anything different than that. Because all domestic breeding is based on evolution. It wouldn't work. You wouldn't get new breeds of dogs if evolution didn't work.
There's another thing, I realize that I'm not trying to insult you by recommending this, I promise.
Don't worry.
It is a kid's book, but Richard Dawkins' new book, The Magic of Reality, talks about evolution. It has a really good example of it, and it's actually, there's an example also in, what's the book that he had before that on evolution? Greatest story ever told. Anyway.
Greatest Show on Earth?
Greatest Show on Earth, thank you. Boy, I went right to a Christian book, sorry. And that's that if you begin with an animal, rabbit, whatever, and you trace its lineage back, every single one of those is of the same species as its parent. It's not like this animal gives birth to something radically different. You would witness between each one almost no change or very little change, and yet when you view the timeline, you can see vast changes between them. And then if you come up to this hairpin and follow a different lineage, you get down to a completely different animal, and the differences between the two animals at the outer branches are vast. They're far greater than the differences between any or between the branch and the linchpin.
There was one exception
I would have
to this.
See that. I haven't seen what you're talking about there, but I'd be interested in seeing what that's all about.
There's another example though. There's a silver fox experiment that you might want to look up. It's pretty well documented, so it should be easy to Google if you just look up silver fox experiment. But they just took these foxes that were pretty much wild foxes that they had used for fur trade, and they look very wild. I mean, it looks like a pretty ferocious animal. And when they were having trouble handling them because they're not social species, they're very aggressive and don't handle well even in even when they're used for domestic purposes. And they started breeding for passivity, trying to see if they could breed this into a more passive animal that would be easier to handle in their trade. So they started breeding passive ones that seemed to be less aggressive to see if what they would come up with. And what was weird is that ultimately the entire look of the animal was altered. It wasn't just the passivity. They didn't just get more passive silver foxes. The change was so incredible that they had to actually name it something different. And it came out in considerably few breeding cycles, based on timelines for what you think of as evolution. They came out and ultimately they had like big floppy ears, they had curly tails, they had soft, colorful coats. They didn't even look like the parent species after not too many generations. It was fairly, in my opinion, one of the most like observed changes through breeding animals.
And we're coming down on almost out of time, and I apologize for that. But when you say you hadn't seen examples of this, and that your study of evolution had strengthened your belief in God, the reason I find that baffling is this. First of all, we've got the entire fossil record, which doesn't have every one of these. We don't have a sample from every generation. But we support that with the genetic evidence. And when you look at, for example, Francis Collins, who's an evangelical Christian and not only accepts evolution, but said that DNA evidence alone is enough to confirm common ancestry between humans and all the other apes, etc. And Ken Miller, who's a Catholic and an evolutionary scientist, this is not something evolution is not something that is just for atheists. It's a science, and it is the theory of evolution by natural selection is the theory that explains the facts, but the facts are that these things change. And so you have this idea in your head of half a leg or whatever, and somehow this has strengthened your belief in God, and I don't know why, because even if evolution were confirmed to be wrong today, that would not add one bit of evidence for the claim that a God exists or interacts in any way with reality.
No, that's right. But that was just one example,
So how can evolution possibly?
Other stuff.
We're out of time. They're putting up the credits.
Yeah. All right.
I apologize. Call back another week or send us an email at tv@atheist-community.org. Thanks to everybody on the screen who has formatted the whole new version of the Atheist Experience to be in compliance with public access television rules. Thanks everybody for tuning in. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.